Hello, welcome to this webinar, which is entitled Beyond Boarding School, A Path to Self-Acceptance and Lasting Change. So just to introduce myself, my name is Amelia White. I work as a therapist. I've been doing this for about 15, 16 years now. I've worked in various different organisations and charities, as well as teaching students, training to be counsellors themselves. And in the last 5 years or so, I have chosen to really specialise in supporting ex-boarders. So my intention is to raise awareness of the impact the boarding school can have on children's development and their subsequent behaviour as adults, and then to support them to make changes in their present day life so that they can feel more content within. And part of how I have kind of gone into this route was I did do an in-depth psychotherapy training with Nick Duffel to really kind of expand my own awareness and knowledge, as well as making sure that because I went to boarding school myself, so really kind of making sure that I've done all my own work, kind of released all my own skeletons from my own closet as such, so that they don't come out in my client work. So this is the non-professional CV as such. As I say, that I went to a co-ed boarding school from the age of 11. And I write here about having bulimia because it was the thing that took me first to counselling myself when I was about 23, and I had an eating disorder for 8 years. And it's something that I see a lot of women, but also men who've been to boarding school. Experience or have difficulties in relationship to food. It may not be food, but it may be other addictions. And the way that I was able to understand that for myself was it was about emotional suppression. It was about not feeling my feelings. And once I went to counselling and I realised, oh, this wasn't just about me not being fat, there was more to it. And I kind of got in touch with a lot of the grief that actually I had suppressed, and anger. I moved through it and I've never been bulimic since that day. So it feels it's important because I know it's something that people can relate to. I also talk about depression because I'm aware that that's something that other ex-boarders can experience. And that often comes also when we're not able, we don't feel so able to express ourselves, to express our wants and needs. And that we can feel trapped. We can't get out of a situation. And that's what happened for me at that point. And therefore, having had that experience, I now make sure that I don't suppress my own feelings because I know how important it is. And also make sure I do so many things that also kind of keep my cup full, keep me okay. It's really important. Divorce is something that I have been through, and it kind of happened about the same time that I came across the work of Nick Duffel and Joyce Shavarian. And it's something that a lot of ex-boarders struggle with, finding relationships really difficult. And when I started to understand actually some of my own attachment patterns, it really helped me to make sense of my choice of relationship, my behavior, and also how I could do it differently. And I don't wish it on anyone because it's a horrible, horrible trauma to have to go through. But for myself, it was essential actually to start to understand some of the reasons why I am the way that I am. I have three daughters who are now 17, 19, and 22. And they have taught me so much through parenting, something that a lot of ex-boarders find really difficult because we often don't have a blueprint from the age that we went away to school. And for me personally, it was also about what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a woman, because I grew up in a school where there was a lot of misogyny. And a lot of boarding schools can carry that, but especially with this co-ed boarding school, it was 800 boys, 200 girls. That affected me. And through parenting them, I was at risk of shaming them for being a girl. So I'm really grateful actually for what they have taught me, that it's okay to be a woman. In fact, it's more okay to be a woman. Um, so that's why I mention them. And Brighton and Hove is my home. That's where I live in the UK. So what is boarding school syndrome? So, boarding school syndrome is not a medical category, but it's a proposal that there is an identifiable cluster of learned behaviours and emotional states that may follow growing up in boarding school, which can lead to serious psychological distress. It's the term applied to the long-term impact of boarding school. So this was a phrase that was coined by Joy Sverian, and it really came about through she was a psychoanalyst, and through working with a lot of ex-boarders, she started to notice so many correlations between their behavior and thought this is more than just a coincidence. And for myself now, where I work predominantly only with ex-boarders, there are so many similarities in our ways of being and our characteristics that I concur with her. So I've just written a few or some of them here that I see that really show up for people. So as you're listening to this, just notice for yourself whether any of them resonate. So do you have difficulty in expressing or understanding emotions? Do you fear showing your vulnerability? Do you carry shame? Are you hypervigilant? Have you experienced depression or do currently? Do you find it difficult to regulate your emotions? Do you carry trauma? Do you have responses? Do you have PTSD or complex PTSD responses? Workaholism. Do you find that you need a purpose? Do you put more attention into work than you do your family, for example? Do you find it really difficult to sit still? Do you find yourself needing to be busy all the time and that actually when you sit still, the anxiety can come up? Do you fear failure and criticism? Do you carry imposter syndrome, worried that at work, for example, you may get found out? Do you have high levels of endurance? Can you keep going? It's something that I see so many ex-boarders having. Wonderful in some senses, in that you may be able to run a marathon, uh, but also there's costs because it can sometimes mean that you can stay in a really unhealthy relationship, for example, much longer than someone else would. Do you find it difficult to ask and receive help? Do you struggle from burnout? Do you find it difficult to actually take care of yourself and therefore you miss the signs of exhaustion? Do you find being in groups difficult? Do you find it difficult to trust others? And do you find difficulties with intimacy and relationship? And these are some ones that I just want to touch on with regards to women, because boarding schools were built on patriarchal lines. So they came in with very kind of patriarchal values. So one of the big differences that I notice is that boys are educated to lead, whereas girls are educated to serve and obey. So what happens is the silencing of femininity and emotional needs. So this happens within boys' schools or for boys, anything that is seen as a kind of feminine value is dismissed. But also that happens for girls. So it's really conflicting and confusing. And they also will take on that belief that it's not okay to express your emotions or your needs or wants. Motherhood can bring up a lot for women. And for example, if their children leave home or they go to university, for example, or the first day of school, it can re-trigger their own separation trauma. That can really come up. Lots of women struggle with body image and food-related struggles. And I see a wide range of women who really show up with stress-related illnesses, so autoimmune flare-ups such as chronic fatigue or MS. I'm seeing that more and more come through. Perfectionism, lots of women really struggle with that competition that kind of occurs within all girls' schools. And something also to look at if you are a woman is really just becoming aware of the gender dynamics. If you went to a co-ed school, for example, what that was like. For many girls, it's confusing. There's this sense of I've got to be like one of the boys, but actually I'm also sexualized, and how that impacts us when we leave that environment. So, if those are some of the behaviors, and I'm sure you may recognize some of them, if not all of them, what do I do about it? Um, so, this is what I guess I have worked out over years. Over, like I say, when I first had counseling when I was 22, 23, and I'm now 50. So what I think has helped me, and it's the kind of path that I take people through on the course that I do. So the first bit is recognition, awareness. So learn about the impacts of boarding school. So you can do this through reading the books, you can do this through listening to podcasts, you can start to build up some understanding of the theory behind this. And then it's really important about delving into your own experience, your own story. So that's the theory, but what about me? And when you start to do that, what may happen is that you can start to feel the feelings. And this is a really important part of this, to actually take yourself away from the intellectualization and actually connect with yourself. So, with that young boy or girl who was left outside the school gates, what was that really like for them? And actually, there's something that often happens, which is a bit of a thawing out can happen, and we can start to feel the sadness or the anger. And this is a really important part. And often people miss this because you don't want to feel your feelings. It can feel terrifying. And therefore, people can say, well, why can't I change? I get it, I understand it, but what can I do? But often, this is the missing piece. And once we've been able to do that, we can start to really, I guess, take care of ourselves. So we can move from self-abandonment to self-acceptance and with self-compassion. So once we've come through that place, okay, well, what can we do? How can we support ourselves? What can we let go of? What can we change? So this is when you can start to action behavior change in the present and find more peace within. So I run a 6 month boarding school course called Healing Beyond Boarding School, which I've now been doing for best part of 5 years. I've tweaked it various times along the last 5 years. Each time I do it slightly differently. And this year it is going to be a course, and I'm going to have different cohorts. So one being mixed gender and one being women's only group. And that feels really important to be able to offer both spaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk through the kind of path that I take people from. So whether it's something that interests you or not, I hope that you'll be able to take something away from this that you can reflect on yourself or you can start looking at for yourself. And it gives you some ideas, or if you're having individual therapy, areas that you might want to talk about or that you want to explore on your own. So we always start at the first day of school. So the important part is actually starting to understand what your life was like before you went away to school. So we want to get to know the child you were before you went away. So if you're doing this yourself, get out a journal, kind of reflect. What do you remember? Unfortunately, lots of people sometimes don't remember. And that's actually something that can be really helpful when you're with other people, because when you hear their reflections, sometimes it can kind of unlock your own experiences. But just try and remember what it was like. And if you don't remember, that's absolutely fine also. Sometimes photos, hence that photo of myself, aged 11 in my crazy 15th century uniform. Uh, so sometimes a photo of yourself can really help to just trigger that, or even if not, to just look at that young child like I am there with a ridiculous skirt that was far too long that she had to kind of do up under her armpits to keep up. Um, and kind of that sometimes that can evoke some compassion, and you can start to recognize, God, I was really little, wasn't I, when I had to fend for myself. Another way to start to unlock some of this is just considering, what was homesickness like when you were at school? Were you homesick, and how was it dealt with? How were the children supported in the dormitory if they cried? Did parents come and get them? Were they shamed? So just have a think about what happened to the children who did cry and what support you had and from who. And if you didn't, what did you do? Because it's really normal for a child to suddenly be cut off from their parents, to feel sad and scared, put in an institution, an environment with a bunch of strangers. That's going to be pretty frightening. So, what happened to those feelings if there wasn't a parent there to soothe you and reassure you? Thinking about what exeats and holidays were like. How did you manage that? Each time you went home, you had to kind of open yourself up again and close it down. What happened? So, this is a really important part to start to consider, because then we start to understand, ah, what happened? Why do I not feel comfortable to share my emotions now? Is it linked to what happened when I went to school? And then we look at how you adapt. So, how do you adapt to the school environment? Because once your attachments are broken from your family, the most important thing is that you've got to attach to your peer group. But they may be people who are really different to you. You may be there, for example, on a scholarship. They may be a bunch of really wealthy kids. You may feel like you don't have enough in common. You may have kind of flown over from Kenya and you're suddenly, for the first time in the UK, in a freezing cold environment. And somehow you've got to find a way to fit in. So this is when we start to notice how we can kind of adapt new characteristics or new ways of being in order to fit in. Of course you did, because that's what you needed in order to survive. Um, so by starting to understand this, we can start to see how we changed. So something that's very common for all is that independence. I don't need anyone. I'm not going to ask anyone for help. And then we start to think, well, why was that? Because actually you needed to have those characteristics. They may have been prized at school by your parents. Don't want to upset them. You just get on with it. And then the important thing is to start to think, well, how do they get in the way now? If I've still got those characteristics, how has that shaped me? And are they causing me difficulties now as an adult? An area that we look at on the course is what it was like going through puberty, adolescence, and your own sexual development at school. So when we think about a pubescent teenager and the fact that they are in an institution, if it's single-sexed, just surrounded by your own sex, that you're generally learning from each other about what sex is, or your body, or the shaming that goes on, kind of thinking, where did I learn all about that? Where was the healthy sexual development? Where were my role models? Where did I get my information from? Starting to understand if you're at co-ed boarding schools, then actually what was the pastoral care like? Were people exposed to kind of sexual behavior that much earlier? As a result of being in those environments, what was the pastoral care like? So it starts us to start to understand and formulate why we may have the feelings that we do currently about sex or about our own body, and just starting to put those pieces together. Emotional regulation. So I'd probably say this is one of the biggest symptoms that ex-boarders have is inability, a difficulty in recognize their feelings and then how to manage and regulate them. So a way to start to do this is to learn about trauma and complex PTSD, to be able to recognize how boarding school is a hidden trauma and therefore the impact of abandonment and how it shows up. So for many people, they may say, well, I was really happy at school. It didn't do me any harm. I played in the first 15. I had loads of friends. It was great. Um, However, you were left on your own at a young age. And that is the crucial bit. That's the bit that stays in your body and the bit that gets played out later on in life in relationships. So, regardless, it's not just about the people who experience sexual abuse or vicious violence and bullying. And that is terrible. But that comes on top of the initial abandonment wound. Um, so it's really important to me that people don't discount their own impact of going to boarding school by saying, oh, but that didn't happen to me, so therefore it's okay. Actually, it's the abandonment stuff. It's the wound. It's about having to cut off your dependency to other people and rely solely on yourself. That is the bit that causes havoc later on in life as an adult. So learn what dissociation is and the reasons why. Um, and then the important part is trying to lift the shame and start to turn towards yourself with self-compassion. Um, One of the a really difficult thing that counselors will often do, the kind of cliched counseling question. So how does that make you feel? And actually, often for children who were sent away to school when they're really young, they just don't know. They've got absolutely no idea. Because actually, children learn how they feel through having a parent, through having a caregiver. So a child is scared, but they may not have the language to know that they're scared, but they may have a feeling or a look on their face. And a parent will say, oh, it looks like you're really scared. I can, and give them some reassurance. But for the child in the dormitory at night, they haven't got that parent there to give them that reassurance. So they have to find another way to shut down those feelings. So sometimes people don't even have the language. However, this can be learnt. It's not too late. And that's something that can really be supported through individual therapy, um, or just starting to recognize actually what these feelings are. It's like a real kind of psychoeducational piece. Taking care of yourself. Um, what happened at school if you were ill? So sometimes on my courses, I might say to people, so exactly that question, what happened at school if you were ill? And often the response is, well, I just wasn't ill. And then you think, okay, this is massive. This is group of like children from the age of 8 to 18. How come you were never ill? And then when we start to look through it, it's like, well, you wouldn't have wanted to go to the sanatorium. You just got on with it. And so what we start to see is how you then treat yourself as an adult and how you may have to be at death's door before you go to the doctor. And so by exploring this area, we start to see, okay, this is why, again, I am the way I am. And we can start to make changes and start to seek support and help and start to take care of ourselves in the way that we may not have been taken care of when we were a child. So family life, for me, this is the biggest cost of going to boarding school. Um, because it affects every single sphere of family life. Um, First of all, your siblings, whether you go to the same school or you go to separate schools, what happens for children is that the message is that family isn't that important. And as I said earlier, children have to attach to their peer group. And therefore, what happens later on in life is that same message can be there. And because of the detachment from your home or from your family, it often means that there are no roots. So siblings will live the other side of the world from each other. And then they may have children, and then the cousins live the other side of the world. And there's no importance that's put on the family structure and the system. And I've heard people say that, they were best friends with their brother, for example, and then they went away to school and they never kind of came back together again. And that's really, really sad. And then life with parents, the people often find it really difficult. They don't understand why they're not so close with their own parents, in comparison to other people. So it's really worth understanding and starting to explore, well, there's a reason for that. You didn't grow up with them. You didn't grow up in a family unit with them. It became formal. Your way of conversing became formal. That kind of phone call once a week or that letter writing where your letters may even have been censored or you censored them yourselves just to say things positive meant that you didn't build those relationships and build intimacy, which then is what gets played out later in life in relationships. And then people really struggle with parenting themselves. They had no role model, no blueprint. I remember that when I got to the age of 11, I had no idea how to parent my daughter, um, flailing around because I had no memory of it. And it was a really learning on the job, and trying to find, is this normal? Is it okay? I know that it's all right to not sit down and do 3 hours prep each night, but is it all right to do none? Just had no idea. So it really affects how we parent, and family life can be really overwhelming, for people to be part of. And this often causes crisis, in people, and it's often what can bring people, to therapy or to explore this in the first place. So really being able to understand, again, there are reasons why you may find this more difficult than other people, and it's not your fault. So relationships, intimacy, as I mentioned earlier, how the abandonment wound plays out and how your school experience may have influenced your choice of partner. So, what can be really helpful is understanding attachment styles. And you can find information online with regards to this, starting to see actually, am I anxiously attached? Do I have more of an avoidant attachment style, which comes from John Bowlby? Um, because what we look at is how that child, managed, how they separated themselves from their family, how they detached, and therefore, what does that look like later on in life? Are you someone who finds it difficult to step fully into a relationship? Do you keep one foot out of a relationship? Or maybe you're more anxious and actually you cling for dear life onto that relationship because you don't ever want to feel alone again. And it doesn't make sense rationally, but a part of you remembers what it felt like to be left on your own. And so that can play out in relationships. The emotional suppression that causes a lack of intimacy, this often comes up with couples um, because it's fear related. It wasn't safe to express your wants, needs, emotions, feelings, sadness at school. And often it's a trauma response that will just shut that down, but that gets in the way of intimacy. And your partner may not understand this and get really frustrated with you as a result. But actually, the more frustrated they get, the more overwhelmed you may get and just withdraw. And that causes difficulties. So it's really important, again, to start to understand why this is and then to try and find ways to do it differently. How sex shows up in your relationship, as I mentioned earlier, in puberty, the messages that you got about that, whether you grew up in a single sex school and actually the othering of the opposite gender and what that may mean. If you're gay, the homophobia that I am sure existed within your school, what that means. Um, as a woman, do I even have sexual desire? Or is my body just here to be of service to men? So there are so many things to look at to understand actually how you may have been shaped and what you bring into a relationship. So it's important to find ways to improve your relationship, such as exercises, communication. Couples therapy is really helpful and really important. And something that I really want to reiterate is there are two people in a relationship. So often when people come across this, or I have lots of people who may be sent by their partner to fix them because they've discovered boarding school syndrome. And what I will always say is, yes, we can do the work for you. You can find out about yourself and kind of release and process your own experience. And your partner has to do the same because they will be bringing something into the relationship as well. It may not be boarding school, but it'll be their own background, their own reasons why they have chosen to be with you. So it's really important to not just solely take the blame for difficulties in your relationship. So once you look at all this, one of the things that people find quite overwhelming are feelings. People often, it may be described as thawing out, because if you've kept these feelings at bay for 40 years and they emerge, it can be quite unsettling at times. So this is, to do this work, you need to make sure that you have a safe space, safe people that you can share this with, because that voice to shut them down because it's shameful to have these feelings, is never far away. But it's a really essential part of healing and moving through these is to release these feelings. And then I mean, I'm talking what we do on my course, but then moving towards the kind of latter part, we start to look at ways that we can support ourselves. And one of those ways is using something called internal family systems. Uh, and what we do with that, and looking at that picture there of that woman, is that sense of sometimes we can feel really overwhelmed with a feeling, and it feels like it comes from, say, a younger part of us that we may, an example is you walk into a group at work and you feel loads of anxiety. And there's part of you that's thinking, well, this doesn't make sense because I know all these people, it's a safe space. No one is going to attack me. But that child part who actually was hyper vigilant, was scared in the dormitory that the senior boys might kind of jump on you in the night, is activated in that moment. And so what we have to do is we notice that. And we then have to reassure that younger part rather than don't be ridiculous, there's nothing to be scared about. There's something about understanding why they are the way they are, coming forward with compassion and finding ways to move through this. And that's what we work with when we're working with parts. An important area to look at is self-esteem and boundaries. I guess the archetypal ex-boarder, that kind of confident exterior, yeah, I'm fine, everything's okay, but often underneath can be really low self-esteem. And if we have low self-esteem, we don't put down boundaries. So, an area to look at also to support yourself is understanding where you got your self-esteem from and how was it impacted by your family or your school. It's how we feel about ourselves. And having a look at what you're like with different types of boundaries. Do you put them down? Do you not? And if you don't, why don't you? So often people may really struggle to put down their own boundaries, firstly, to even know what they are, because when you're at boarding school, you don't really have any. There's very little privacy. If you were to say to a senior kind of pupil, no, don't take my packet of biscuits, uh, you may be hit, it may get you in worse trouble. You may get punished. So therefore, often people are like, yeah, whatever, you take the biscuits. And it's how that plays out in life because it's like, I don't want to upset anyone. And the fear of conflict means that we don't do things like that. So an important part of us is really looking at how that plays out in adult life and what we can do and how we can do it differently. Looking at your values and work is really important. So, understanding where our values came from, how they were shaped by your family and schooling, and then updating them to who they are today. Sometimes I work with people and they may come at midlife, and it feels like a real crisis when you start to look at this because there's a kind of awareness or an awakening even of, oh my God, I've just been living by these values that have been imposed on me through my parents or through my schooling, that actually if I worked really hard, then everything was going to be okay. If I got this particular type of job, then it was going to make me happy. However, it's not. And what do I do about that? So this is where it can be quite helpful to start to understand this and kind of come up with your own values, not just those that were imposed on you or that was your conditioning. So as we kind of work through this, um, so as I kind of described, the first piece as such is so much about the awareness and the understanding and the developing self-compassion, feeling the feelings, the grief, the sadness. We then look at actually how those ways affect us in our present day life. And what things we can do. So, things that come up in our relationships, in our friendships, noticing which ones we want to hold on to, which ones we want to let go of, how we can put down boundaries, how we can talk to our parents. Do we share our feelings? Do we not? All those kind of things that we start to look at. And then it's kind of starting to think, well, which parts of my survival personality can I let go of? And often at this point, people can be quite scared because actually, this way of being has literally held you. It's got you to where you are now. And I would never be saying, right, you need to get rid of all that, because that's not what needs to happen at all. But it's noticing when it is useful and when it isn't. So, for example, that independence may have enabled you to travel the world or to have little need for comfort, and therefore you've slept in hostels and boats and whatever throughout your life. Um, but does it benefit me now in a relationship to never show my emotions, to be solitary, to never rely on anyone else? So you start to tweak and just kind of start to make changes. And it's not easy. An example is of a few years ago, my partner, I was cycling along the seafront in Brighton and it was really cold and I didn't have any gloves and it was freezing. And I remember him saying, take my gloves. And I was there going, no, no, I'm absolutely fine. I don't need your gloves. Of course I'm okay. Rough, freezing hands. And then because of all this, I thought, no, Amelia, come on, this is it. You've got to do it differently. You've got to do it differently. And it was really hard, but I forced myself to go, thank you. Yes, I will take your gloves. And it was so much nicer because I had warm hands. So it's that's an example of kind of like where the awareness can cause you to challenge your present day behaviors. And actually, it meant that I didn't get frostbite and I was okay. So this is where we start to, as I said here, turn self-abandonment into self-parenting. So we stop turning against ourselves because that's often what happens when you've been abandoned. You continue to abandon yourself. You don't nurture yourself. You don't wear a warm coat, that kind of thing. And we start to look after ourselves. And then you also can find your spirit. So you start to find wonder and joy and playing because that's what children don't do. When you become a mini adult from the age of 7, 11, 13, um, finding that part of you again, being creative, that's what we look at towards the end of our course and the kind of actually what we can bring in now, lifting the shame of who we are. So it's about integrating all these different parts of yourself that you may have split yourself off from. So if that is something, if you want to explore this with me, then I do offer this 6-month course, and it starts on October the 1st. And I basically do it once a year. Um, and it is 12 modules. And so what happens each week is it's part of an online platform and you would receive module one, for example, first day at school. And in that there will be a video from me in which I will talk it through, and you would have kind of reflective exercises. And then the following week we would meet in a group and reflect on this particular subject. So in the groups, there's a maximum of 10 people, and I'm doing different cohorts. So there's a mixed gender group or a women's only space this year, 12 o'clock or 6:30. Um, and this is really the space, I want to say that's where the magic happens. So I have tried this course where I've just offered it without the groups. Um, but the whole point about boarding school is you do everything on your own. It's all intellectualized. So the hardest bit is actually sharing it with other people. But I personally think that a lot of the damage or the wounding is done by breaking of relationships. So I think that the healing comes from being in relationships with each other. And that's what I see on my course over and over and over again. I'll just move on. That just talks about what I said. But people are constantly amazed at the connections that they make with each other, especially when they're a bunch of ex-boarders and they think those are the people that I spent most of my life trying to not connect with, and then suddenly realize, oh, we get each other. I'm not alone. Um, and it's wonderful to see the solidarity that comes with doing this together. And I also think it's what lifts shame. So, as I say, this lasts for 6 months. It costs £1,097. You can pay in installments of £183 per month. And if this is something you're interested in, then let me know. There are limited places and the doors close as such on basically last Friday of September. This is something that I just added here because this is why I do it. So when I kind of wrote that title about what do I think helps make changes, I do think it's group work. I think there's a real place for individual therapy and it's different for everyone. Um, I think individual work is really supportive and helpful, especially when you're first coming to this also. If you need to build up that safety and trust with one other. If this is the first time you've spoken about this, then that might be what you need. If you have your own experience of sexual abuse that occurred at school, then I would always recommend that you have some individual therapy because that's not something that we're going to spend time on talking about within this group format because it's not a safe enough environment in an online space to do that. So although I touch on it, that's something that I'd always recommended that you spoke about in individual work and got the support that you needed for that. Lots of people do this course and they have individual therapy on the side so that actually if stuff comes up, then they can go and talk with their counsellor about that. And that's something I would recommend. However, what the group work does do that individual work doesn't do is it breaks that I'm the only one feeling, that kind of isolation, that sense of no one else gets this. You may be from a family of ex-boarders. You may be, all your friends may have that kind of attitude of, it was the making of me, it was the best thing. So it can feel really hard to use your voice. So when you come together with other people who are all going, me too, I get it, it's very empowering and it really helps to lift that shame. So, as I say here, that witnessing and being witnessed and learning to trust others. I said that's something that from school people find really difficult. And so my aim with this is that we create a kind of corrective experience on what it was like being in a group at school. People learn how to express their emotions to one another without shame. And then they can take that out and do it with their partners, their family, their friends. And the other thing I love is what we bring each other, what everyone brings, because you don't just want to hear from me bleating on all the time. I love the creativity that I see that comes out. People will often share poetry they've written, drawings, writings, music, and that's really inspiring and really wonderful. And I always really welcome that, whatever anyone else brings in that helps, and that creates this wonderful community feel. And it boosts our self-esteem. Self-esteem is often affected by those who we spend our time with. And that's what I see that people create from this group. They feel like they matter, and you do matter. And that's what comes up when you're part of a group. So that sense of empowerment that can come and a real feeling of belonging. So these are just some testimonials that I've had recently. Um, This is from a man. I recently had the privilege to attend the boarding school course. After many years of individual talking therapy, I feel like I've finally participated in something that has shown me the path to my own freedom. If you have the calling inside you to make a significant shift in your patterns, then look no further. Amelia creates a special place full of care and understanding that supports all the course participants, giving them both permission and the courage to embark on the deepest and hardest work one can do. I cannot express my gratitude enough for the gifts that Amelia and the course have given me. So this guy, he'd actually been in therapy himself for about 8 years, and he'd done workshops with Nick Duffel. And something that I recall he said was so helpful was the length of time of this course. The fact that it wasn't just a weekend workshop and then you're back getting on with your every life. It was the container. And it's a long time. 6 months may feel like a really big commitment to kind of be part of this, but it does go quickly. And it's about I'd be lying if I say this is a quick fix. We're looking at every aspect of your life here. Someone once said this is more than just a course, this is a kind of exploration of yourself. And that is what happens. Um, so it's deep work. It is. And I wouldn't be saying anything other than that because sometimes people can feel like, oh, God, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So you have to feel like, okay, I'm ready to explore this now because it's a case of, what's the word? Turning over every stone. Is that what I mean? That you will come out with having looked at every aspect of boarding school for yourself. So this is a recent testimonial from a woman who just finished in July, actually, saying that realizing that I've been stuck in my survival personality for 45 years has helped me reevaluate everything. The impact of boarding school has seeped into every corner of my life. Jobs, relationships, friendships, eating habits, sleeping, bad property decisions, desperate to have a home, attachment to my belongings, self-esteem, every damn neurosis. Amelia's content made a lot of sense. I've read all the books, watched the films, plugged myself into podcasts, etc. But the communal immersion of our calls, plus the private work in the handbooks, encouraged me to actually step into the work rather than remain academic, distant, and somehow unable to relate it fully to me. Such hard work, but so healing. And this is one more that literally just came through last week. This course has given me the space and permission to grieve my childhood and hope for future and understand why I felt so lost almost all my life. Working with brilliant Amelia and the other lovely members of this small group has enlightened and emboldened me. There's still work to be done, but this course has given me the scaffolding that'll allow me to rebuild myself slowly and steadily with the understanding, acceptance, and self-compassion that was missing before. This is the first time I've committed to something for myself and seen it through to the end, and it's been the best investment I've made. The work is profound, and the validation from others has been everything. This course is for any ex-boarder wanting to find their way home. I'm really grateful for what people have shared, and I hope that gives you a sense of the kind of, I don't know, the connection that we can make within these groups. alongside what I do, there's lots of other things out there to support you. So if you're after individual therapy, I would always recommend looking at boardingrecovery.com. Every therapist on there has been trained by Nick Duffel. Nick Duffel? Yeah. Everyone's done the kind of in-depth psychotherapy training with Nick Duffel. Um, Doing different types of therapy, such as EMDR and brain spotting, which really kind of helps process trauma, can be really, really helpful. Doing different things, moving with your body, somatic work is really helpful. And then there are other things such as family constellation work, shadow work, where it's much more somatic, it's more experiential. And I think doing a mixture of all these things can be really helpful. Um, but don't do them all at once. It's just kind of it's what speaks to you at the moment, if this is what you want to do. Boarding School Concern is the newly named Boarding School Survivors, and they have a conference. They have a website with information, and they run a conference every London in November. November the 1st it is this year, which is a day, and it's quite something being in a room with about 150 people. Um, so that might be something that you want to come to and dip your toe in as such and have a look at that. And then also the beginning is reading the books. That's where most people start, and it's really important to kind of build some awareness of that. There are a lot more books that have come out in the last 5 years, which is wonderful because it used to always just be Nick's and Joy's, those two. And a book that's recently come out is The Unmaking of Them, which was edited by Nick, which is actually a collection of different chapters written by different psychotherapists. So it's bringing other people's experience in. I've written one of them about the impact of co-ed boarding schools on girls because that's something that's important to me and something that's not written about much. And finding your way home is a really important one, I think, for women, especially third culture kids, so children who are sent to boarding school from other countries, and people find it really helpful to relate to other people. And then there's the Boarding School Survivors Facebook group people find helpful, which is free, where people just kind of post their own stuff, but it can help you not feel so alone. And I haven't written it here, but Seen and Heard is another website and organization, and they offer some kind of free group work that you can just kind of check in with if that is something that you'd want to do as well. So they've got quite a lot of resources on their website, so have a look at that. That's it. Done. So I hope that's been helpful for you. I hope that has, yeah, either opened your eyes to some of this, made it, I don't know, clearer or more aware um, about some of this. And I guess for me, it's about validation because one of the hardest things for those who've gone to boarding school is to use your voice and to speak up and to kind of feel beyond the privilege. Do I say that? Yeah, to see beyond the privilege, and to recognize that your feelings are valid. And what I hope for everyone is to move to a place where they feel that they matter and that they're important. And that's the kind of, I can't think of the word because my brain's tired. But that's the uh, children are sent to boarding school with the impression that it's because you matter and you're important and you're going to be privileged, you're going to have the best education that you can have. However, most people don't feel underneath that they matter and that they're important and they're lovable. What matters is how well they do and how they achieve and their status. And that's the bit that we're trying to switch around so that people feel they genuinely matter for being themselves. Any more information, send me an email. And yeah, take care of yourselves.